cents a litre. It's the third increase this year. For more on this, I'm joined from our Pretoria studio by Economist Tinyiko Ngwenya. Thanks so much for your time, Tinyiko. This record petrol price increase at 82 cents, what factors led to this?
The key factors that impact the petrol price would really be the oil price, firstly, and secondly is the rand. So with last year, the OPEC agreement, we've seen that Saudi Arabia, Iran, and many of the other OPEC countries have kept levels at quite a steady, stable production level. So that's helped kick the oil price coming up a bit. So we've seen oil prices hovering around 75 to the dollar, and that's impacted really just the price at which we import oil prices. So remember, as South Africa, we're an oil importer. So it's very important that we also think about what the rand is doing in terms of currency, because that would be the price we pay for petrol too. And we just had the economy contracting in the first quarter and the impact on that with the rand. So we've seen a weaker rand in that we were quite disappointed with the GDP numbers and the noise around the US with the trade negotiations as well. Emerging market currency seen a lot of weaknesses. So it appears that with the rand weakness and the fact that oil prices are still quite steadily high, that we may even see another petrol price increase in the next 2 months.
So people who, for instance, use taxis should be expected to have their fares increasing. What other hidden costs come with a petrol price increase like this?
The truth is that when we think about just our CPI basket or any consumer, transportation costs are quite high. And I've just moved to Johannesburg, so I now understand the traveling from one place to another in terms of fuel costs. And another key thing in the goods basket is that food and electricity. So if we think about just transportation itself, with the costs coming up there, those then make it harder for a consumer to, spread their expenses evenly around what they have for food, perhaps for electricity or any other discretional income. And in fact, we've just seen as well with household consumption, that came out at about 1.5% increase. And so the Reserve Bank is also a bit worried about what this impact will have on inflation going forward in terms of petrol price increases.
So Adrian Seville is quoted as saying that we can see that income per capita has run flat from 2008 to date. Is this correct? And does it mean that we've been earning the same amount of money from 2008, but we're seeing these increasing value-added tax as well as petrol price increases and the like? And how do we as consumers offset that if that is the case?
Well, that number really comes from the fact that we have a growing population. Our population is growing quicker than our economy is growing. And when that happens, then in terms of just wealth distribution, our income disparity in terms of South Africa's inequality distribution, that gets a bit higher. So the reason it's been stable or rather declining is really because the economy hasn't been growing enough and as quickly as our population growth is. And so it really comes down to the fact that we really need to see sustainable growth pick up in order to, bring people into the economy, especially in terms of that high unemployment rate that we have. We're sitting at around 27%. So in order for us to get people to earn a bit more money, to contribute a bit more to the economy, we really need those driving forces to come to the party.
So I was asking about how perhaps consumers can offset that, but let's move on to a little bit of a bigger picture. In the United Kingdom, motorists saw the biggest increase in petrol price in 18 years. So it's not just a South African issue. Is there a way that our governments can cushion us from these factors that you've spoken about, the oil price and currency fluctuation, to make sure that we are not seeing these big increases that we are?
Well, in terms of just petrol price, what we do is that we buy in terms of futures. So when the rand is strong, we buy a bit more barrels and we store them in the big tanks that we have to try and offset the increase coming into inflation. So that is one key area. Unfortunately, we have seen a VAT increase as well. So that started to come into play in terms of just the consumer basket. And we saw that in terms of the inflation number that we had last month. So yes, there are ways for the government to, import a bit more petrol and store it in the barrels to offset the high increases in inflation. But it also comes down to a sustainable currency. And in order for us to be able to know where the currency is going, you need good sentiment in terms of what government is doing with Ramaphosa's investment campaign, etc. We need to know that there's positive sentiment in the country and investments coming in. And then secondly, in terms of just rand stability, is what's happening in the US as well. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, emerging markets, when volatility is high, they become at risk in terms of their currency.
Tinyiko, thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Tinyiko Ngwenya, an economist, speaking to us there about the petrol price increase and the effect that it will have on us as South Africans.
The South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SABC,